The lobby of Caldwell and Royce Financial Group had always been designed to intimidate. Polished black marble floors, towering columns, and chandeliers shaped like falling constellations. People walked through it with the reverence of entering a sanctuary built for ambition. Once, Amara Lewis would have walked in softly, careful not to take up too much space. Once, she would have checked her reflection in the glass to make sure she looked appropriate, presentable, acceptable. But that was before she learned to crown herself. Today, the doors swung open for her, like they had been waiting. Amara moved through the lobby as though it were simply a hallway in her own home. Her steps were unhurried, deliberate, confident. Light caught the deep tone of her skin, warm and radiant against the cream-colored suit tailored perfectly to her frame. Her hair, coiled and proud, framed her face like a halo carved from history. No hesitation, no apology, no remnants of the woman who once loved someone who could not love her properly. She pressed the elevator button. The ride upward was silent except for the steady rhythm of her own breath. The higher the elevator ascended, the clearer the skyline unfolded through the glass panels. Steel and glass stretching endlessly, a city of dreams claimed through blood and will. When the doors opened, a hush fell across the entire floor. Conversations paused, fingers stilled over keyboards, heads turned, and in the far corner of the open office, seated in a tidy cubicle near a glass-walled private suite, Ethan Caldwell looked up. His eyes widened the way a man recognizes a storm too late to seek shelter. The last time he had seen her, she had been standing in the doorway of the apartment they once shared, holding back tears, watching him walk away into a life he claimed she could never follow. Back then, she had been cracked open, fragile, soft in the places life had not yet hardened. But the woman standing before him now was fully realized. Amara did not look away when their eyes met. She did not rush. She did not falter. She let silence make her announcement before her voice ever did. A senior partner stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Everyone," he said, trying and failing to sound composed, "please welcome our new majority shareholder and chief executive officer, Ms. Amara Lewis." The words rang across the room like the toll of a cathedral bell. There are moments in life that do not simply change the story. They rewrite the meaning of every chapter that came before it. This was such a moment. Amara's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something quieter and far more powerful. Grace measured in restraint. "Good morning," she said softly, and the room leaned in to hear her. Her voice carried warmth, but beneath it, steel. Not the cold kind, but the kind forged in fire, shaped by hands that knew how to build, not destroy. "I look forward to working with all of you," she continued. "We are stepping into a new chapter, one grounded in integrity, innovation, and purpose. This company will not just succeed, it will matter." She let the words settle. Then, only then, her gaze found Ethan again. Not accusing, not longing, not triumphant, simply free, as though she had never needed him at all to become who she was always meant to be. Ethan swallowed hard. He had no language for the gravity of what stood in front of him now. Amara turned to the conference hall doors. "We begin in the boardroom," she said. "Please join us." Her heels echoed as she walked, each click a punctuation mark on the sentence of her arrival. Somewhere, someone whispered, "She's incredible." Someone else whispered, "She came back different." Someone else simply breathed, "I want to be like her." And Amara, without needing to hear any of it, felt the truth. She had not just returned. She had risen. If you felt something in this moment, the quiet power, the reclaiming, the soft but unshakable strength, go ahead and tap the heart, leave a comment, or follow for the next chapter. Your support helps this story continue to unfold. There was a time when life was small but full, a time when love felt like a warm lamp glowing in a single-room apartment, steady and enough. Years before the mirrored elevators and marble hallways of corporate power, Amara and Ethan shared a creaking one-bedroom walk-up in East Atlanta Village, where magnolia trees leaned over narrow sidewalks and the evening air always smelled faintly of fried catfish from the corner stand. The apartment had no central heat and only one window that actually opened, but they had decorated it with secondhand bookshelves, mismatched mugs, and old jazz records that hissed softly as they played. Back then, The world didn't need to be grand. It only needed to hold the two of them. Amara worked at a small community center, sitting with families who had never been taught how money worked, who had been told in 1,000 subtle ways that wealth was for other people. She would guide them gently, showing them how to build savings slowly, how to escape predatory loans, how to believe that their futures were not predetermined. Ethan used to love that about her. He would watch her at the table, eyebrows furrowed in concentration as she annotated workshop notes, and he would say, half in awe, half in wonder, "You look like you're building something invisible, but enormous." Amara would laugh, brushing his hair out of his eyes. "I'm just trying to help people find space to breathe." And Ethan would kiss her forehead, murmuring, "That matters." They did not have expensive dates. They had late-night grocery store runs and picnics made from whatever they found in the back of the fridge. They danced barefoot in their kitchen while pasta boiled over. They stayed up until 2 in the morning debating music, philosophy, dreams, the kinds of dreams that spoke not of power, but of meaning. On Sundays, they would walk through a neighborhood where old houses leaned like sleepy giants. They would point and imagine future lives. "That one," Ethan would say, choosing the house with the wide porch. "No, that one," Amara would counter, choosing the one with the wild garden. They were happy then, quietly, completely. There were moments so small they might have seemed forgettable to others, but they had carved themselves into memory. Like the night the power went out during a summer storm. The building went dark, the air thick and heavy. They lit the one candle they had, vanilla-scented, purchased on clearance, and sat shoulder to shoulder on the floor, legs stretched out into the darkness. Rain tapped softly against the window, thunder rolling like distant drums. Ethan rested his head on her shoulder. "You make this feel like home," he whispered. Amara leaned her cheek against his hair and answered without thinking. "Not the apartment?" "No," he said. "You." Back then, the world outside seemed distant, as though real life began and ended at their door. They were not naive. They simply believed that love could be a foundation solid enough to build a life upon. And for a while, it was. But even in those tender days, there were shadows forming at the edges, the kind that are too quiet to name when they first appear. Ethan would sometimes come home speaking the language of people who measured value in status and upward motion, words he had never used before. Leverage, influence, prestige. He began wearing shirts that looked like they belonged to someone slightly older, slightly sharper, slightly hungrier. He would say, "I just want us to have more." And Amara would smile softly and reply, "So do I, but not at the cost of ourselves." He would nod, kiss her, but the nod carried a question, and the kiss carried an unease neither dared to touch. Still, the love was real, undeniably real. The kind that makes you believe there will always be time to understand each other better. The kind that lets you trust that growing together will simply happen because you want it to. The kind that makes parting seem impossible. There was a night, late winter, when Amara fell ill with a fever. Ethan made her tea, wrapped her in blankets, and read to her from a dog-eared copy of Baldwin. His voice was soft, patient, tender. She drifted in and out of sleep to the cadence of his words, his thumb brushing circles on the back of her hand. She remembers that night with clarity, sharper than any pain that would come later. Because love does not vanish just because it fails. It remains, archived, a quiet museum of who we once were. And in that museum, there are rooms of golden light. Rooms like this one. Rooms where two people believed they were walking toward the same horizon. The shift did not arrive like a storm. It came quietly, like a draft under a closed door, felt before it was seen. At first, nothing in their world looked different. The same one-bedroom apartment, the same chipped blue mugs, the same Sunday walks past houses they pretended might one day be theirs. But Ethan had started staying later at the firm. "Networking dinners," he said. "Team strategy sessions," he explained. "Just one more night," he promised. He returned home, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his, a scent chosen to impress, or to blend. He spoke of the office now the way someone might speak of a kingdom they believed they were destined to inherit, full of power brokers, legacy families, and people who had grown up in worlds where confidence was not learned but inherited, like a family crest. Amara listened. She wanted to share his excitement, to feel happy for him, but the distance had already begun to settle, like dust across their conversations. When she spoke of the families she served at the community center, single mothers drowning in payday loans, retirees terrified of losing their homes, teenagers working 2 jobs to keep their siblings fed, Ethan's eyes grew distant. "You're doing good work," he would say, but the words carried a soft, brittle hollowness. The tone of someone speaking of something admirable but unimpressive. Once he had admired her compassion. Now he treated it like a relic. One evening, they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table that had once been covered with fresh flowers and candle wax stains. Now it was clean, too clean, as if laughter had been scrubbed away. Ethan stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. "You know," he began, eyes fixed on the spoon, "I just think maybe we could aim higher." Amara tilted her head. "Higher in what way?" "In life." He searched for the words. "In status, in trajectory, in," he hesitated, "the circles we move in." The circles we move in. The phrasing stung. "As in," she asked quietly, "my work doesn't fit the image anymore?" His sigh was weary, almost frustrated, though with whom, neither of them could say. "It's not that your work isn't meaningful. It is, but it doesn't lead anywhere." Amara felt something tighten in her chest. She had heard versions of that sentence before, spoken by banks, by policymakers, by people who believe success must glitter to be real. "And what do you think does lead somewhere?" she asked. Ethan looked almost relieved to explain. "Asking the right people for opportunities, being seen in the right rooms, proving we belong there. That's how people rise." She held his gaze. "And who defines the right people?" He didn't answer. Not because he couldn't, but because he already had. From then on, silence began accompanying them like a third presence in their home. Patient, insistent, impossible to ignore. There were moments Amara tried to bridge the widening gap. She would cook his favorite meals, waiting for the warm, unguarded smile she used to know. It never came back. She would share stories from work, the woman who'd paid off her first debt, the teenager who'd opened his first savings account. But Ethan's responses were polite, surface level, distant, and slowly she began to speak less. It is difficult to offer your heart to someone who no longer knows how to hold it. Yet the most painful shift was not spoken. It was felt. It happened the night they attended a charity gala hosted by Ethan's firm. Crystal chandeliers glowed like gilded moons overhead, and conversation floated through the air, light, practiced, effortless. Women wore gowns that shimmered like poured gold. Men wore confidence like armor. Amara had worn a simple dress, elegant but unadorned. She stood beside Ethan as he introduced her to colleagues. "This is Amara," he said. He did not say my partner, or the woman who taught me how to love, or the person who makes my life make sense. Just Amara. A name without meaning. She saw the glances, the subtle appraisal, the silent sorting into categories. Important, useful, impressive, and she saw something flicker in Ethan's eyes. A hesitation, a small, terrible shame, not of her, but of how she might appear through their eyes. It was then she understood. The fracture had already formed. Long before this night, long before the dress, the gala, the introductions. The foundation had begun to crack the moment Ethan started believing that success required leaving something behind, and that the thing could be her. Later, as they drove home in silence, city lights slipping like ghosts past the car windows, Amara watched him from the passenger seat. She saw a man reaching for a world that promised everything. She saw a man who feared not having enough. She saw a man who had forgotten how much he already had. She loved him still. But love alone was no longer enough to hold what was breaking. And in her chest, something quiet and sorrowful whispered, "This is how leaving begins." It happened on an evening so ordinary, it should not have held the power to change everything. The air outside was warm, the kind of southern spring evening where the sky glowed lavender long after sunset. Amara had stopped at a small bakery on her way home, picking up Ethan's favorite peach tarts. Soft, sugary, the kind he used to close his eyes to savor. She carried the box carefully, imagining his smile, telling herself that small tenderness could still soften whatever was hardening between them. Their apartment was quiet when she arrived. No music, no lights, just the faint smell of his cologne lingering like the memory of something already gone. She called his name softly. No answer. She placed the pastries on the counter and walked into the bedroom. And stopped. The closet door was open. The side where his clothes hung was half empty. Suits gone, shirts gone, shoes gone. The hanger bar gleamed bare and accusing. At first she stood very still, as if any movement might shatter the fragile moment before meaning crystallized into reality. Her heart did not break then. Hearts do not break like glass. They fracture slowly, along fault lines that have been forming for months. On the table was a single envelope, her name written in Ethan's familiar, hurried handwriting. She sat down. Her hands trembled, but she opened it anyway. Amara, I need to say this plainly because circling around it will only make this worse. I'm leaving. I know this feels sudden, but the truth is I've been drifting for a while now. I think you felt it too. We're growing in different directions, and staying would only hold us both back. I've met someone. Her name is Caroline Ward. You'll meet her name again, I'm sure. She understands the world I'm trying to rise into. She moves in circles where ambition is recognized, where success is expected, where our lives can be bigger than this. You're good, Amara, so good. But your world is small, and you seem content with that. I can't be. Your work is noble, but it will never lead anywhere beyond sacrifice. I need a partner who reflects the future I want, not the past I'm trying to leave behind. I hope someday you'll understand. Ethan. Amara read it twice, 3 times, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. Your world is small. Your work will never lead anywhere. I need someone who reflects the future I want. The peach tarts were still on the kitchen counter. She couldn't cry yet. Her body hadn't released her into grief. She felt suspended, caught between the life that had been and the life that now yawned open, unfamiliar and hollow. She walked to the window. Outside, the city moved on without her. Cars passing, laughter echoing from the street below. The world indifferent to the collapse happening in a 4th-floor apartment with peeling paint and 2 toothbrushes now reduced to 1. When the tears finally came, they arrived silently. Not dramatic, not desperate, just steady. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass and understood something with devastating clarity. It wasn't Caroline that hurt. It wasn't even the leaving. It was the belief behind his words, the belief that her life, her work, her compassion, her dreams were less. He had not simply left her, he had diminished her. And Amara, who had always given love freely, realized how deeply she had entrusted her sense of worth into hands that did not know how to hold it. She walked back to the kitchen. The peach tarts waited on the counter, still glowing under the soft kitchen light. She picked up the smallest one and took a bite. Not because she was hungry, not because she could taste anything, but because she needed to remember something. Her life did not end here. The sweetness sat heavy on her tongue. She wrapped the rest carefully, placed them in the refrigerator, closed the door gently, as if gentleness could keep anything from breaking. Then she sat at the table where they had once shared morning coffee and late-night plans, and let the quiet settle around her like a second skin. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just the quiet realization that the chapter had closed without her permission. In the hush of that moment, she whispered, barely audible, I loved you real, and you left anyway. No anger, no bitterness, just truth. Outside, the lavender sky faded to night, and inside, Amara sat in the soft ruin of what had been love, unaware that one day she would return to this memory not with ache, but with gratitude. Grief does not always arrive with screaming or shattered glass. Sometimes it comes as quiet unraveling. In the days after Ethan left, the apartment became a museum of small absences. His shoes no longer sat by the door. His coffee mug, chipped at the rim, no longer waited in the sink. The bed seemed too large, and the silence too loud. Even the air felt different, as if the room itself had exhaled someone it had been holding. Amara moved through it like someone trying not to disturb ghosts. She went to work. She came home. She ate when she remembered. She slept only when exhaustion dragged her under. But grief finds its way into the body. It lives in the bones. It lingers beneath the surface of breath. The first sign of collapse came in the morning, at the community center. She was teaching a budgeting workshop, standing in front of a small group of parents who sat in folding chairs, notebooks open. She had given this workshop many times before, her voice usually warm, animated, filled with conviction. But that morning, she lost her words. Mid-sentence, her voice simply dissolved. Her hands trembled, her vision blurred. A participant, a grandmother with tired eyes and a bright floral blouse, reached out and touched her hand. "Baby," she whispered, "sit down. Just breathe." Amara sank into the nearest chair and let her head fall into her hands. Later, in the break room, Jamal found her sitting on the floor, back against the cabinets, knees drawn to her chest. She was not crying, not exactly. She was simply empty, the grief too deep for tears. He slid down beside her without speaking. Minutes passed before she managed to say, voice raw, "I don't know who I am without him." Jamal didn't rush to correct her. He didn't tell her she was strong. He didn't offer cliches. He simply asked, softly, "Who were you before him?" The question landed gently but pierced deeply, because she knew the answer, once, but she had buried it in love, in compromise, in the quiet accommodations we make when trying to be enough for someone who does not recognize worth unless it shines like currency. That night, she returned to the apartment and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Her reflection looked unfamiliar, not older, not broken, but thinned, as though something essential had been scooped out of her. She leaned forward, pressing her palms to the counter, and whispered, "This is not who I am." But the voice lacked conviction. The second sign of collapse was financial. The rent, once shared, now rested entirely on her salary. She began cutting corners, canned soup, thrift stores, bus rides instead of trains. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table, the same table where dreams once sat beside coffee cups, and spread her bills out before her. Numbers blurred. Her chest tightened. Her breath came shallow. For the first time in her life, Amara felt the sharp, metallic taste of fear, the kind that lodges in the back of the throat and refuses to move. She worked longer hours to avoid coming home, but exhaustion is a slow poison. The third sign came one evening when she returned to the apartment. She didn't even remove her coat. She simply slid to the floor, back against the door, and stayed there. Hours passed. The room darkened around her. She felt as though she were dissolving, not disappearing, but becoming unrecognizable to herself. When grief reaches a certain depth, it does not shout. It whispers, "You are alone." And Amara believed it. On a Sunday morning, she finally allowed herself to look at photos from before. There they were, her and Ethan, laughing in their kitchen, tangled on the couch, standing in front of the house with the wide porch they used to imagine owning. She studied her own face. She had loved with her whole self. She had opened without hesitation. She had believed love to be mutual creation, not conditional transaction. And he had left her for wanting a life measured in meaning instead of power. Something inside her trembled, not with anger, not with heartbreak, with clarity, because this was the truth she had been avoiding. The collapse was not just about losing him. It was about losing the version of herself who thought she needed him. The grief was not only love grieving its end, it was identity grieving its undoing. She closed the photo album and placed it gently in a drawer. No anger, no ceremony, just release. And then, slowly, she inhaled. A deep, steady breath. A breath that did not restore her, but made space for the possibility that she could rebuild. Collapse, she realized, is not the end. It is the clearing before new foundations are laid. The first warm day of early summer arrived quietly, sunlight spilling like honey across the city sidewalks. Children played in chalk-drawn hopscotch squares. Someone, somewhere, was barbecuing. The world seemed alive in a way Amara did not yet feel herself capable of joining. She sat on a weathered bench outside the community center, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she had not touched. The breeze lifted the edge of her cardigan. She stared ahead, not at anything in particular, but into the kind of distance where the mind drifts without direction. She felt thinner, not in body but in presence, as if she were taking up less space in the world. Jamal approached without announcement. He moved the way certain people do when they have learned how to meet grief where it is, quiet, steady, undemanding. He sat beside her, letting silence settle first. Not as a void, but as a companion. After a while, he spoke. "You've been disappearing." His tone was gentle, not accusatory. Amara's fingers tightened slightly around the coffee cup. "I'm trying," she said, "to keep moving. to keep functioning. That's not the same thing as living, Jamal replied. She remained still. Stillness was easier than unraveling. He turned slightly, watching her with the kind of patience that could not be rushed. You don't have to pretend you're fine. Not with me. At that, her breath wavered, just slightly, but enough to break the stillness. I thought we were building something, she whispered. I thought love meant we were building together. And now I look back and I can't tell if I misunderstood him or myself. Jamal nodded, thoughtful. You didn't misunderstand anything. You built honestly. He left dishonestly. That's the difference. Amara shook her head. But what if he was right? What if my dreams are small? What if my work is insignificant? Jamal let out a slow exhale, steady and grounding. Amara, look at me. Reluctantly, she did. The wind lifted a curl from her forehead. Her eyes were tired. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something unbroken, something waiting. Do you remember Mrs. Gaines? Jamal asked. Amara blinked. The grandmother raising her two grandsons? Yes, the one buried in debt because she co-signed a loan she didn't understand. The one who thought she was going to lose her home. Amara nodded slowly. You sat with her for hours after work, Jamal continued. You made phone calls. You negotiated. You explained every line item. You held her hand when she panicked. I remember, Amara murmured. She kept her home because of you. Her grandsons still sleep in the same beds. She still waters those plants on her windowsill. She told me last week she wakes up every day grateful for the life you helped her keep. Amara's breath caught. Jamal leaned closer, voice low, steady, unwavering. You didn't lack ambition. You had direction. You just didn't have the room to grow yet. Amara pressed her lips together, and for a moment her vision blurred. Ethan didn't leave because you were small, Jamal said. He left because your sense of purpose made him feel small. The words landed with the clarity of truth that had been waiting to be spoken. And finally, Amara let herself cry. Not the silent tears of before, but a release. Thick, shaking, grieving not just love but self. Jamal did not touch her. He simply sat beside her, a steady presence, while she let the grief move through her. When the sobs slowed, when breathing returned, when her body eased, he spoke again. You are allowed to want more, Amara. Not less, more. For yourself, for your work, for your life. Amara wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand. Her voice was quiet, but something new lived in it. What if I don't know what more looks like yet? Jamal smiled, not with happiness, but with recognition. Then that's the beginning, not the end. The breeze stirred the leaves of the oak tree above them. Children laughed somewhere nearby. A dog barked. Life went on. But something inside Amara shifted. Not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden revelation. A seed, small, but living. The kind of seed that, given time, water, and patience, breaks through concrete. She looked down at her hands, steady now. I want to help more people, she said slowly, the thought forming itself as it materialized. Not just a few at a time. Not just those who walk through our doors. I want to build something that reaches them where they are. Something that scales. Something that matters. Jamal's smile widened, not proud but relieved. There she is, Amara exhaled. Not like someone surrendering, but like someone beginning. The collapse had emptied her. Now there was room to build. In the weeks that followed, life did not suddenly become easy. Healing is never a clean ascent. It is a slow, uneven rising, gentle one day, aching the next. But something had changed. The grief that once weighted Amara's chest now made space for thought. Not loud, triumphant thought, but quiet, persistent thought, like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat returning after shot. She began to notice patterns in the stories of the people she served. A single mother trapped in cycles of payday loans. A young man whose credit score had been ruined before he understood what credit was. An elderly couple targeted by predatory lenders because they trusted too easily. These were not individual tragedies. They were patterns, structured, repeated, predictable, which meant they were solvable. One evening, Amara sat at her small kitchen table, now cleared of bills, though not of memory. She opened her laptop, not to escape through distractions, but to search with intention. She typed, How to scale financial literacy access. The search results were academic papers, nonprofit models, corporate think tank presentations, solutions designed for conferences, not for people. None of them reached the communities that needed them most. She leaned back. The question was not, how do I help more people come here? It was, how do I go to them? The idea arrived like a breath, unforced, natural, inevitable. A digital platform, but not the kind built for investors or banks. Something human. Something that understood the language of survival, not theory. A platform that could translate complex financial systems into clear, compassionate guidance. Offer personalized budgeting and credit building tools. Alert users to predatory risks before they were harmed. Grow from neighborhood to neighborhood, city to city, without losing its soul. A bridge, yes, a bridge between the world of financial power and the world that had been systematically excluded from it. Her pulse quickened. She opened a blank document and began to write. Not polished prose, not business jargon, just purpose, poured onto digital paper with urgency and clarity. People don't fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because the system was never built for them. She wrote until her fingers cramped, until the room grew dark, until her eyes burned. She did not notice the hours passing. The apartment, still bearing quiet echoes of absence, felt different now. Not haunted, full. Full of ideas, full of future. The world had told her that her work was small, that her mission was soft, that her dreams lacked ambition. But what is more ambitious than trying to change the conditions under which entire communities live? She closed her eyes. Images formed, slow, luminous, like lanterns drifting across water. A teenage girl opening her first credit report and understanding it. A father mapping out a debt payment plan that no longer crushed him. A grandmother sending her grandson to college because she finally escaped the loan that once held her captive. Lives shifting not dramatically, not instantly, but undeniably. This was not charity. It was architecture, the architecture of freedom. The next morning, she brought the idea to Jamal. They sat in the community center office, surrounded by old filing cabinets and the gentle hum of an aging ceiling fan. Amara slid the laptop toward him. He read in silence. When he finished, he sat back slowly. There was no quick enthusiasm, no empty praise, just something steadier. That's not a program, he said softly. That's an institution. A movement, a future. Amara exhaled, something between relief and realization, yet hesitation flickered at the edges of her confidence. I don't know anything about startups, she said. You didn't know anything about saving homes from predatory loans either, Jamal replied. And yet, here we are. She looked at him, searching for doubt. There was none. You don't have to know everything, he continued. You just have to be willing to learn. And to try. Her throat tightened, not with sorrow this time, but with the fragile, rising warmth of renewed belief. The idea was no longer a whisper. It was a pulse, steady, alive, undeniable. That night, Amara worked again, drafting, researching, reworking. She read stories of women like Madam C.J. Walker, who built enterprises rooted in empowerment, of activists who understood that knowledge is a liberation tool, of leaders who refused to choose between compassion and ambition. She felt herself joining a lineage she had not yet realized she belonged to. The apartment was quiet as she stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. This was the beginning, not of revenge, not of proving anyone wrong, but of remembering who she had always been before love and loss had clouded it. A builder, a protector, a woman who believed that helping people rise was not small work. It was the most powerful work there was, and this time, she would not build quietly. She would build something that could not be ignored. Courage does not arrive all at once. It comes in steady breaths, quiet choices, and moments where the heart whispers, try again. For weeks, Amara continued developing the platform concept in the late hours of the night. She taught herself new skills, read articles, watched lectures, and filled notebooks with diagrams and questions. The idea grew, not just in shape, but in clarity. It no longer flickered like a fragile candle flame. It stood like a steady lamp, illuminating a path forward. But an idea, no matter how brilliant, cannot move a world unless it is spoken aloud. So one crisp morning, dressed in a navy blazer borrowed from Jamal's sister and holding her laptop like both shield and offering. Amara walked through the revolving glass doors of the Atlanta Innovation Hub. The building was the opposite of the community center. Sleek panels of glass, buzzing fluorescent lights, walls covered with motivational phrases like "disrupt the system" and "dreams scaled become vision." People moved quickly here. They spoke in acronyms. Their laughter sounded sharp, metallic, caffeinated. Amara felt small, but only for a breath. Then she remembered Mrs. Gaines, the teenage boy, the father working 3 jobs. She lifted her chin. She was not here to impress. She was here to serve. The pitch session was being held in a mid-sized conference room. Young entrepreneurs waited in folding chairs, scrolling through their slides one more time. Some were dressed in sharp suits. Others wore hoodies and sneakers, the uniform of modern ambition. A woman with copper braids and round glasses checked names on a tablet. "Amara Lewis?" "Yes," Amara answered. "Room C. You'll be third to present." Amara sat. Her heart beat steadily, not frantic, just awake. The first presenter was confident, rehearsed, practiced. A tech product that used AI to optimize luxury travel experiences. Investors nodded, amused, intrigued. The second presented a sleek new brand of wearable fitness trackers. More nods. A few raised eyebrows of interest. Then, next we have Amara Lewis. She stood, not gracefully, not dramatically, just steadily. She walked to the front of the room, her laptop in her hands. Her voice, when she began, was soft, but it did not waver. "My work has shown me something consistent," she said. "People are blamed for financial struggles that were designed into the system long before they were born." She clicked to her first slide. Faces, not statistics, real people, real stories, real lives. The room quieted. "This platform," she continued, "does not ask people to adapt to a system that was not made for them. It meets them where they are. It translates financial language into human language. It offers the tools that institutions keep behind closed doors. It gives people agency, and agency is power." She spoke for 12 minutes, not rushed, not apologetic. When she finished, she closed her laptop. Silence followed, not the kind that signals indifference, but the kind that signals thinking. A man in a tailored charcoal suit leaned back. "This is different," he said. "Most financial empowerment tools target people who already have resources." "Exactly," Amara replied, "which is why they fail to change anything." Another investor tapped his pen. "Your target users have low financial capacity. Where does revenue come from?" Amara met his gaze. "We partner with credit unions, community banks, and local employers. We build trust. When people flourish, those institutions flourish. We monetize through their growth, not through the exploitation of the people we serve." A few murmurs of interest, a few skeptical glances. This was, after all, a room accustomed to profit framed as progress. Finally, the woman with copper braids spoke. Her voice carried the calm of someone who understood nuance. "There is heart in this," she said, "and there is strategy. It will not be easy. You will face pushback. You will face skepticism. But if you build this well, you won't just create a product. You'll shift an entire narrative about who wealth belongs to." Amara felt something warm rise in her chest. The panel did not offer investment, not yet. That would require further meetings, prototypes, data. But they offered something else. A place in the accelerator cohort. 3 months of mentorship, connections, resources, a room in which she could grow. As Amara walked out of the building, the afternoon sunlight caught on the city glass, scattering golden warmth across her face. She stopped at the sidewalk, closed her eyes, and took a breath. Not the breath of collapse, not the breath of survival, the breath of beginning. Behind her, the glass doors reflected a version of herself she was just beginning to remember. A woman who did not wait for permission. A woman who built from the heart. A woman stepping, not timidly, not shyly, but fully into the arena. The accelerator cohort began on a humid Monday morning, the kind where the air felt heavy, like rain was deciding whether to fall. Inside the glass and concrete workspace of the Innovation Hub, though, energy hummed like a power line, bright, restless, electric. 12 founders, 12 ideas, 12 visions burning at different intensities. Amara took her place among them, not yet confident, but steady. Steadiness, she had learned, was a kind of bravery. Her days shifted into new rhythms. Early mornings at the community center, evenings in workshops learning financial technology compliance, user interface architecture, market segmentation. Late nights at her kitchen table, refining a concept that was quickly becoming more than theory. She built wireframes, simple sketches at first, a welcoming homepage, a guided budgeting tool, a debt mapping visual that showed progress with every payment, no matter how small. The platform needed a name, not something corporate, something that felt like possibility. She wrote words, crossed them out, wrote new ones. Haven, a place of safety, a place people enter not to be judged, but to breathe. That was it, Haven. She said the word aloud to the empty room, and it settled into the air comfortably, as though it had been waiting for her to find it. But building something real meant facing challenge after challenge. One evening, Amara sat in a cafe with her laptop open, surrounded by the low murmur of conversation and the clatter of ceramic cups. Her financial model refused to balance. A partnership proposal had been delayed again. A potential advisor had suggested she step back and let someone with more experience take the lead. The suggestion had not been cruel, just careless, thoughtless. The kind of dismissal she had learned to hear in her life. The suggestion that heart and intelligence were somehow separate qualities, that people who cared deeply could not also build powerfully. As the weight of it pressed in, Amara closed her laptop. She let the frustration sit, not pushed away, not swallowed, just felt. Then she opened the laptop again, slowly, deliberately. She did not walk away from the work. Jamal visited often during those weeks, sometimes bringing food, sometimes simply sitting nearby while she typed. On Saturday afternoons, he helped her table at neighborhood events, speaking to residents, listening to concerns, gathering real voices to shape Haven. "Systems don't fail accidentally," he said once, watching her take notes from a single mother with tired eyes and a resilient posture. "They fail by design." Amara nodded. "Then we redesign." Progress came in quiet milestones. The first prototype users successfully built a budget in less than 10 minutes. A local credit union expressed interest in a partnership. A community organizer offered to help pilot Haven in 2 neighborhoods. None of it looked dramatic. No applause, no spotlight. But it was movement, and movement was life. Amara's heart began to settle into her ribs again. Breathing became easier. Her body felt like it belonged to her once more. When she walked into rooms now, she did not shrink or assess herself through the eyes of others. She took her place, not as someone proving she deserved to be there, but as someone who understood she had built something worthy. She ate better. She slept more. She laughed, less frequently still, but with sincerity. Healing did not erase hurt. It built new scaffolding around it. Near the end of the cohort, founders were asked to present their progress to the advisory board. The night before the presentation, Amara stood alone in the hallway outside her apartment. The door behind her was still the same fading paint, the same slightly crooked numbers, the same light bulb that flickered when it rained. But she was not the same. She placed her hand on the doorknob and paused, letting the moment land. This was the home where her heart shattered. This was also the home where she learned to rebuild. She stepped inside. The evening light fell gently across her desk. The peach tree outside her window rustled softly in the breeze. Her reflection in the darkened window looked back with a calm she had not seen in months. She opened her laptop, not to distract herself, not to chase validation, to finish something she believed in. Slide by slide, detail by detail, she refined her presentation, not with drama, with clarity. By midnight, she closed the laptop, not with exhaustion, with peace. The next day, when she stood before the board, she did not speak quickly. She did not fill silence to prove competence. She did not rush toward approval. Her voice flowed like water, gentle, patient, unforced. She spoke of people, not markets. She spoke of access, not charity. She spoke of dignity without ever needing to use the word. And when she finished, the room was quiet. Not because they doubted, because they were considering, because something true had been placed before them, something necessary, something real. The board did not interrupt. They did not rush to respond. Finally, the director of the cohort leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Ms. Lewis," she said, "you are not building an app. You are building equity." Amara's chest lifted. Yes, she was, and she was just getting started. When change comes, it rarely announces itself with fanfare. It arrives in small moments, soft, almost ordinary, yet unmistakably alive. It began on a quiet Thursday morning at the community center, the kind of morning when the sunlight warmed the walls through tall windows, and the sound of children's laughter floated in from outside. Amara had just finished reviewing printing estimates for Haven training booklets when her phone buzzed. Subject: Partnership approval. Greenhaven Credit Union. She blinked, read it again, then a third time. Approved. Not maybe. Not pending. Not let's revisit this after more traction. Approved. Her breath caught in her chest. For a moment, the world seemed held in stillness. Chairs, papers, the ticking of the clock, all suspended in a fragile amber of disbelief. She read the message from the credit union director. "We believe your platform aligns with our mission. We are ready to pilot Haven across 3 branches. Let's build this together." Her hands covered her mouth, not to hide emotion, but to steady it. Tears gathered, not tears of grief this time, but something gentler, brighter. Relief, validation, hope. The kind of hope that does not flutter, it arrives. She stepped outside, where the faint scent of cut grass floated in the air. Jamal was in the courtyard, organizing materials for the after-school program. He looked up at her, and before she spoke a word, he knew. "What happened?" he asked, though his voice already carried the beginnings of a smile. Amara's laugh broke through her breath, soft, disbelieving, joyful. "They said yes," she whispered. "They said yes." Jamal closed the distance between them in 2 steps and wrapped her in a long, quiet embrace. Not celebratory, reverent, as though he recognized the exact weight of this moment. "You did this," he murmured. "Not in spite of everything, through everything." Amara didn't respond. She simply let herself be held. Because sometimes victory doesn't roar. Sometimes it sighs. The next days were filled with motion. Urgent, purposeful motion. Meetings with Greenhaven staff. Drafting user guides. Refining onboarding flows. Testing software stability late into the night. Exhaustion came, yes, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. The kind born of forward movement, not survival. One evening, Amara sat in her apartment surrounded by stacks of papers and open tabs on her laptop. The soft glow of her desk lamp cast warm light across the room, making shadows feel gentle instead of looming. She paused to stretch, letting her gaze drift to the window. Outside, the city lights sparkled as though they were winking in quiet approval. And for the first time in a long while, she did not feel small in their presence. She felt part of the constellation. A phone call interrupted her thoughts. Her mother, who lived 3 states away. "Baby," her mother said, voice warm and steady. "You sound different today." Amara smiled, leaning back in her chair. "I feel different." Her mother did not ask why. Mothers sometimes already know. They talked about ordinary things. Her mother's garden, a new student at her job, the weather turning. But under their words lay something deeper. The quiet joy of witnessing a spirit returning to itself. The official pilot launch took place on a Saturday morning. Greenhaven's smallest branch sat on a corner near a row of old brick shops, the kind of place where regulars greeted staff by name. Amara arrived early, carrying a box of Haven pamphlets and a stack of tablets. Her hands did not shake, not like before. She felt steady, rooted, present. As people began to gather, parents, teenagers, elders, workers on break, Amara stood before them. She spoke not with performance, but with warmth. "We deserve spaces where understanding isn't gatekept, where knowledge isn't rationed, where dignity is assumed, not earned." Faces lifted, shoulders softened, eyes met hers with something like relief. She introduced Haven. She demonstrated the tools. She answered questions with patience and respect. And then, a moment. An older man stepped forward, His voice was quiet, but resolute. I've been afraid to look at my finances for years, but this makes me feel like maybe I can. Amara did not rush to reassure him. She nodded. You can, and you don't have to do it alone. He let out a breath that sounded like release. By noon, dozens of accounts had been created. Phones were tapped. Smiles were exchanged. Lives shifted, just a little. Not dramatically, not all at once, but undeniably. As the day came to a close, Amara stood beneath the soft shade of a nearby magnolia tree. A breeze rustled the leaves, scattering the scent of blossoms through the warm air. She closed her eyes and exhaled. And in that exhale lived everything she had lost, and everything she had gained. Her heart did not ache for Ethan, not anymore. Because love that requires diminishing oneself is not love. It is hunger. And she was no longer starving. She had fed herself. She had rebuilt herself. She had stepped into a life that was hers alone, and she had just seen the first proof that it would matter. Success did not arrive like a thunderclap. It gathered gradually, like dawn, light creeping across a horizon that had once felt endless and dark. After the first Green Haven pilot, word traveled quietly through the neighborhoods, not through advertisements, not through press releases, but through voices, shared over back fences, in hair salons, at church basements, inside barbershops where truth was spoken plainly. There's a new program. It actually makes sense. They treat you like a person, not a problem. Trust spread, and trust, Amara knew, was stronger than any marketing campaign. Soon, 2 more credit unions joined, then 4. Then a regional bank reached out, curious, not because Haven was flashy, but because it worked. Meetings multiplied, partnerships formed, investor calls shifted from polite interest to intent. Amara found herself in conference rooms lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, seated across from people who once would have looked past her, people who now listened. Not because she fought to be heard, but because her work spoke for itself. She learned to navigate their language, but she did not let it shape her voice. She did not harden her edges or mimic their cadence. She brought her own, and the room adjusted to her. One afternoon, during a major pitch with a nationally recognized philanthropic fund, the lead board member, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair and a gaze that could slice, asked, "What is Haven's endgame, Ms. Lewis? What, ultimately, are you trying to change?" The room stilled. Amara did not think. She remembered Mrs. Gaines, the teenage boy, the father choosing between rent and groceries, her own reflection in a dim apartment bathroom, learning to breathe again. "We're not just teaching financial literacy," Amara said softly. "We're restoring the belief that wealth is not a privilege of birth, but a human right to stability. We are dismantling shame. We are making room for dignity." Silence followed. Not doubt, respect. The fund approved a multi-year grant. Haven was no longer a concept. It was a force. Yet rise is not only external. It is internal, subtle, tender. Amara's life shifted in ways she felt in her body. Her shoulders no longer curled inward. Her voice no longer waited for permission. Her steps matched the pace of someone who had not only survived the burning, but gathered bricks from the ashes and built a city. She moved into a new apartment, not luxurious, not ostentatious, simply hers. Windows that filled with golden light each morning. Shelves lined with books and small plants that unfurled like soft green prayers. Space to breathe, space to exist, space to become. And in that quiet, new space, she rediscovered joy. Not joy that bursts like fireworks, joy that glows steady, like embers that do not go out. She laughed more, not because life was easy, but because she had begun to trust herself. Jamal saw it. Sometimes when they worked late at the center or shared meals over takeout containers, he would look at her with this expression. Not romantic longing, not admiration-seeking acknowledgement, but something gentler. Recognition. He had seen the collapse. He had witnessed the rising, but he did not reach for her. He did not assume love would follow healing. He honored her pace, her sovereignty, her reclamation, and that restraint was its own form of love. The day Amara was invited to speak at the Regional Economic Summit, she stood backstage watching attendees take their seats. Policymakers, corporate leaders, journalists, educators, people who shaped the frameworks within which lives unfolded. Once, She would have felt like an intruder here. Now she was a keynote. When she stepped on stage, applause rose, not for spectacle, but for substance. She spoke not of power gained, but of power returned. Not of ambitions sharpened, but of ambition widened. Not of rising above, but of rising with. Her voice flowed like water over stone, gentle, unyielding. People did not simply listen, they leaned in. Her final words lingered after the auditorium fell quiet. We change the world by changing who believes they deserve one. When she finished, the room stood, standing, for her work, for her people, for the future she refused to let be dismissed. That night, she walked home alone, choosing the cool air and warm pavement under streetlights over the waiting car service. A soft breeze moved through the magnolia leaves overhead. Her shadow stretched ahead of her, tall, unbroken. She thought of the girl she once was, sitting on a kitchen floor, grief heavy in her chest, believing she had lost everything. She had not lost. She had been cleared. Cleared so she could build. Cleared so she could become. And now, she walked forward not to prove herself worthy, but because she already knew she was. News of Haven's expansion began as a low hum in professional circles. An article shared on LinkedIn, a mention in a panel discussion, a whispered curiosity at networking events. But soon the hum became a presence. It did not roar. It resonated. And resonance is far more dangerous than noise. Caldwell and Royce, once seen as a polished tower of financial prestige, watched from a distance. Their model was old money, old structures, old power. Investment strategies speaking in percentages and yield curves, presentations framed by the priorities of shareholders who never saw the lives beneath their numbers. Their world had always assumed stability. Their world had never accounted for disruption born from compassion. Because Haven did not simply exist, it revealed what traditional firms refused to acknowledge. People did not need to be reshaped to fit the system. The system needed to be reshaped to fit the people. And the moment that truth became visible, Caldwell and Royce began to fracture. First came the losses. Small clients at first, credit unions choosing Haven's model of education-centered partnership over the firm's traditional consulting fees. Then mid-sized banks. Then community foundations, who had once been impressed by Caldwell and Royce's glossy presentations, now questioned why their strategies ignored the lives affected. Then came the whispering, inside corner offices, in elevators, across late-night boardroom tables. The market is shifting. We don't have a strategy for this. Why are we losing relevance? The executives blamed timing, trends, economic climate, anything except the core truth. While Caldwell and Royce protected wealth, Haven grew wealth. While Caldwell and Royce measured value by accumulation, Haven measured it by access. One hoarded, the other opened, and the world was beginning to choose. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at quarterly reports that felt like accusations. Lines that once rose steadily now dipped. Columns once printed in black now bled red. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion dragging at his bones. He had spent years climbing, shaping himself into something leaner, sharper, more acceptable. Sleepless nights, carefully worded emails, networking dinners where he laughed at jokes that were not funny, agreed with opinions that were not his, nodded as others spoke over him. And now the foundation he had sacrificed everything for was beginning to sink, slowly but undeniably. In the boardroom, voices argued over strategy, some insisting the firm pivot to tech-based advisory platforms, others demanding acquisitions, mergers, aggressive expansion. Ethan listened, but his mind drifted to a small apartment in East Atlanta, to laughter over burned pasta, to slow, barefoot dancing in a kitchen warm with love rather than ambition, to a woman who believed success was measured in lives changed, not in rooms entered. He had once loved her, and then he had left her because he believed the world she dreamed of was too small. But the world she dreamed of was beginning to become real, and he was watching from the other side of a glass wall he had built with his own hands. The breaking point came on a gray Tuesday morning. The firm had called an emergency all-staff meeting. Employees gathered in the vast open office where ambition once buzzed like fluorescent lighting. Now the air was heavy with unspoken dread. The CEO, Ethan's mentor, the man whose approval he had once chased like air, stood at the front, jaw tight. "We are restructuring," he announced. "There will be reductions. There will be department consolidations, and some leadership positions will be reevaluated." Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. Leadership positions. Reevaluated. His own department had underperformed. His name was on those reports. His future was suddenly a question. His vision blurred, not with tears, but with a clarity so sharp it cut. He had not risen. He had traded. He had traded warmth for proximity to power, compassion for image, love for ambition that had never belonged to him. The room emptied around him. People murmured. Some whispered sympathy. Some avoided his eyes. He sat alone. For the first time, without defenses, without excuses, without distraction, he allowed himself to speak a truth he had buried so deeply it had nearly hardened into denial. "I chose wrong." Not quietly, not dramatically, just honestly. Late that evening, after the building had emptied, Ethan stood at the window of the 27th floor. The city stretched endlessly below. Glass, concrete, motion. Somewhere out there, Haven was changing lives. And somewhere in that story was Amara. Not the woman he left, not the woman who cried in silence, but the woman who rose. He closed his eyes and saw her as she stood that day in the lobby. The day she returned as her own force. Graceful, whole, beyond him. He did not feel anger. He did not feel bitterness. He felt awe and regret. But regret, when true, does not ask to rewrite history. It simply acknowledges what was lost. And he had lost her long before she walked away. He had lost her the moment he began believing that greatness could only be found in rooms she was never meant to be in. Because she was not meant to fit into those rooms. She was meant to transform them. And now she was. The city was quiet in that late autumn hour when daylight had just begun its slow retreat. Skies bruised purple, streetlights flickering awake. The kind of dim hush that makes everything feel suspended, like the world is holding its breath. Amara stood just inside the glass doors of Green Haven's main branch, finishing a meeting with new community program coordinators. She had been speaking all afternoon, guiding, listening, teaching. Her voice was warm, her smile steady, the kind of steady earned, not performed. As she slipped her notebook into her bag, she felt a shift, subtle but unmistakable. A presence, a memory entering the room before the man himself did. She turned, and there he was, Ethan. He looked smaller than she remembered, not in stature but in presence. The crisp perfection he once wore like armor had softened. His suit hung a little tired on his frame, his hair less carefully styled. His face carried the faint, unshielded exhaustion of someone who had been fighting quietly for far too long. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There are silences that wound, and silences that repair. This one did neither. It simply acknowledged the truth of time. "Amara," he said finally. Her name and his voice no longer struck like a memory. It sounded like a page being turned. She nodded. "Hello, Ethan." He swallowed, eyes searching her face, not for permission, not for forgiveness, but for something gentler. Recognition, perhaps. A bridge back to the place they once stood together. "You look, well," he said, and the understatement hung between them like fragile glass. "I am," she replied simply. No performance, no triumph, just truth. He exhaled, the breath of a man who had rehearsed 1,000 versions of this moment and still found himself unprepared. "I heard about Haven," he said. "It's everywhere." The corner of her mouth lifted, not proud but anchored. "It's helping people," she said. "That's all I ever wanted." He closed his eyes briefly, as though the sentence touched a fault line inside him. "Amara," he began, voice unsteady. "I was wrong." The words were quiet, not forced, not strategic. A confession spoken from the inside out. "I thought success meant being seen in the right rooms. I thought the people who already had power were the ones worth impressing. I thought you didn't want enough." His voice cracked, not dramatically, but humanly. "But you wanted more than I ever understood. You wanted to build something that mattered, and I traded that for something hollow." Amara looked at him, not with anger, not with pity, but with understanding softened by distance. "I didn't need you to see the world the way I did," she said. "I only needed you to believe mine was worthy too." He drew in a sharp breath, the kind that catches on realization. "I know," he whispered. She could have told him about the nights she fell apart, She could have told him about finding her way through grief that felt like drowning. She could have told him about rebuilding her life from the quiet rubble of heartbreak. But she did not owe him her wounds, and he did not ask for them. Instead, he said the only thing that remained, "I'm sorry." 2 words, not enough to rewrite the past, not meant to, but true. Amara nodded once, graceful, steady, whole. "I accept that," she said. He looked at her then, really looked, not as the woman he once loved, not as the woman he left, but as the woman she had become. A woman who stood fully in herself. A woman whose life was built with intention, not reaction. A woman who no longer needed closure because she had already given it to herself. "I'm glad you're well," he said softly, and she believed him. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," she replied. There was no lingering, no backward glances, no half hope of something rekindled. He stepped back. She stepped forward. Their paths no longer intersected. He walked out into the dusk. She walked toward the conference room where new team members waited, ready to build the next phase of Haven. Behind her, the door closed. Ahead of her, the future widened. Not with victory, with peace, and peace is the greatest rise of all. Winter arrived quietly, with soft gray mornings and evenings that dimmed before most people left work. The city moved at a slower rhythm. Breaths, visible in the cold air, footsteps muffled on damp sidewalks. In this gentler light, everything seemed softened, edges, memories, and even wounds. For the first time in a long while, Amara felt stillness settle into her life, not as silence, but as serenity. Her days were full, but not frantic. She led strategy meetings in the morning, visited community partners in the afternoon, cooked dinner in her own kitchen at night, lettuce crisp beneath her knife, garlic sizzling in olive oil. The simple rituals of living returned, and they felt like gifts. On Sundays, she walked to the park near her apartment, where the pond reflected bare trees like ink sketches. She would sit on a bench, a thermos of chai warming her hands, and watch joggers pass. Faces flushed, breaths quick. Children fed breadcrumbs to ducks, who paddled eagerly toward every offering. The world continued with a kind of ordinary grace. It was here that Amara discovered something surprising. Her heart no longer ached when she thought of Ethan, not because she had forgotten him, not because she had erased the past, but because the love had settled into a soft, unsharp memory. She remembered the warmth of their early days, the laughter, the shared late-night softness, and she did not deny that those moments had mattered. They had, deeply, truly. She also remembered the unraveling, the sharp words unspoken and spoken, the leaving. But those memories no longer clung to her. They simply existed. Love had not been a mistake. It had been a chapter, a necessary chapter, the one that had taught her how much of herself she was capable of giving, and how important it was to give to herself too. One evening, as snow began to fall, small and unhurried, Amara lit a single candle opposite her at the dining table. It cast warmth across the room, dancing on the spines of books stacked near the window. She ate slowly, tasting each bite. She was alone but not lonely. She thought back to the woman she had once been, the one who had knelt beside a kitchen cabinet, heartbreaking quietly, believing she might never feel whole again. Amara wished she could reach back in time, kneel beside her and whisper, "There is a life waiting for you that you cannot yet imagine, and you will not have to shrink to fit inside it." Instead, she whispered it to the air, perhaps knowing that in some subtle, impossible way, her past self could hear. There were moments when echoes of the old life returned, a song on the radio, a dish they used to make, a street they once walked. But instead of pain, these moments carried a gentle awareness, like turning pages in a book already read. She no longer tried to retell the story. She no longer replayed conversations in her mind, searching for the one moment where she might have chosen differently. Closure did not come from confrontation, or explanation, or apology. It came from living, from breathing, from rebuilding, from rising into herself. And in that rising, she understood something essential. Healing is not the absence of hurt. Healing is when hurt no longer directs the course of your life. One day, as Amara left a community financial workshop, she paused outside the center's doors. The winter sunlight was pale and slanted, turning the city golden at the edges. Her breath rose softly in front of her. She closed her eyes and let the warmth behind her ribs expand. She had not just survived. She had not just rebuilt. She had chosen herself. Her voice, her work, her worth, not defined by who stayed, who left, or who witnessed. There was no bitterness in that realization, only quiet gratitude for what had taught her, for what had freed her, for what had brought her here. She walked forward, steps steady on the cold pavement. The world unfolded effortlessly ahead, not because life had become perfect, but because she had. Not flawless, not untouchable, perfect in the sense of whole, complete within herself. Winter light glittered against her cheek as she continued on, and with each breath she felt it. She was no longer carrying the past. She was carrying herself. Spring returned in a slow golden unfurling. The magnolia trees blossomed again, wide, fragrant petals opening like quiet declarations of hope. The city streets shook off winter's gray and settled into a softer brightness, as though the world itself remembered how to breathe. Amara walked through the community garden outside Greenhaven's central hub, where volunteers were planting basil, collard greens, tomatoes, marigolds to keep the soil gentle. Sunlight warmed her shoulders. Her steps were unhurried. She had learned how to move without rushing, how to let life meet her where she stood. A young woman approached her, a college student who had been attending Haven workshops for 3 months. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Miss Lewis, I paid off my first loan today." Her voice trembled not with fear but with pride. Amara felt something bright lift inside her, not the sharp brightness of triumph, the warm brightness of witnessing someone reclaim themselves. "That's beautiful," she said, her smile as real as breath. "How do you feel?" The young woman pressed a hand to her chest, laughing in disbelief. "Like, the world is a little more mine than it was yesterday." Amara nodded. Yes, that was it. That was everything. Haven expanded to 5 states that summer, then 8, then 12. Not rapidly, not recklessly, but intentionally. Rooted, not scattered. Amara traveled to cities she had never been. Towns where hope had been dim for years. Neighborhoods where people had stopped expecting the system to work for them. She listened. She learned. She adjusted. She grew. Her work was not just leadership. It was stewardship. She never forgot the kitchen where she once cried. She never forgot the silence that once pressed against her lungs. She never forgot the hollow space where her sense of self had once slipped away. Those memories were no longer wounds. They were compass points. They reminded her of the journey. They reminded her of her becoming. And they reminded her that rising is not about leaving the past behind. It is about transforming it into foundation. Sometimes Jamal traveled with her, speaking at schools, hosting workshops, sharing the kind of grounded, generous wisdom that made people straighten their spines and exhale deeply at the same time. They did not rush toward romance. They did not need to. Their connection grew the way seeds grow in spring soil. Slow, sure, guided by sunlight and patience. There are loves that blaze and consume, and there are loves that grow, steady and nourishing, like water shaping stone. Theirs was the second kind. One evening, while they packed materials after a training session, Jamal looked at her for a long moment, not with longing, not with hunger, but with recognition. "You built what you used to talk about," he said softly. "Back when you thought you couldn't." Amara paused, tape dispenser in hand, breath lifting gently. "No," she said smiling, not proud but humble, full, alive. "I built what I always could. I just had to remember." He smiled back, slow, warm, real. No declaration needed. No urgency. Some futures reveal themselves without needing to be chased. Years from now, people will tell the story of Haven as a movement. They will speak of its impact, its reach, its innovation. But the truer story, the one that lives behind all of that, will always begin with a woman who broke open, who collapsed, who rebuilt herself piece by piece, deliberate piece, until she stood not wounded, not hardened, but whole. A woman who learned that love is not proven through sacrifice. Worth is not confirmed through someone else's validation. Power is not something taken. It is something risen into. Amara's life did not become perfect. No life does. But it became hers. Entirely hers. And the world, brighter where she touched it, kept opening. If you have felt something in this journey, If you recognized your own quiet strength, your own rising, your own becoming, then this story has already reached exactly where it was meant to. Take a moment before you leave. Breathe. Let the warmth settle in. And if you'd like to continue with stories of strength, love, healing, and becoming, go ahead and like, comment, or follow to stay close. There are more stories waiting, and your heart deserves to meet them.